So for a start, it sounds like the superannuation age could be different. So that's a point of difference, isn't it?
Well, possibly. Who would know? I don't know where this government stand on superannuation. They've had a pretty much do-nothing approach to it.
Well, now Bill English is saying, he's going to take a look at it. He's not adopting the same stance as John Key had.
Well, let's see what happens. He's been sitting around that same cabinet table and as finance minister for the last 8 years. He's been capable of making decisions. He could have put money into the New Zealand Superfund. He hasn't. That's why the New Zealand Superfund is way behind where it needs to be to fund that future cost of superannuation. I personally don't agree with lifting the age of eligibility. My 20 years professional life before I entered Parliament was working with working people, many of whom struggled to get to 65 already. So I don't support lifting the age of eligibility, but there's other things that could be done. Let's see what they do. OK,
well, on that, Labour's policy was, at the last election, was to incrementally raise the age to 67 from 65. So you've essentially U-turned and now you're adopting John Key's stance.
I stood for the leadership of the Labour Party on the basis that I don't support and we wouldn't increase the age of eligibility for superannuation. That's been our policy since I've been leader. That's not changing.
Why is it that you're taking this approach?
Because there are working people who do physical and manual jobs throughout their working life. Right now they struggle to get to the age of 65 already. I met a lines technician a few years ago who was 64, looking forward to his retirement at 65. His employer had approached him and said, listen, we can't find replacement line technicians. Do you mind working till you're 70? He was horrified. And I said, well, you're entitled to retire. You're 65 eligibility, you get your superannuation, you make the decision, you do what you want to do. He retired at 65. He simply could not do that physical work anymore.
What about people who don't work in those sorts of industries?
Well, I'm saying that if we have a universal superannuation, then we've got to have same rule for everybody, and that age of eligibility needs to remain at 65.
What about the affordability of this? You're saying KiwiSaver is already behind where it should be, and you're saying if it's
the New Zealand Superfund,
You're saying the Superfund's behind. So what about this situation means you're going to essentially be funding it for longer?
Well, you've got
people retiring at 65.
Yeah, you've got. I mean, that's part of the cost of New Zealand Super.
So how is this going to be affordable?
But that's why the last Labor government set up the New Zealand Superfund, to start putting money aside that could then be invested, grow the capital fund. It's available there to fund the future cost of superannuation. We know that superannuation and the cost of it is going to rise rapidly during the 2020s. That's why that fund was there. This government, the minute they got into government, stopped making contributions, haven't put a dollar extra into it. The growth of the fund in the last 8 years has been because of its investments, and it's done very well. But that won't be enough to meet that rising cost of future cost of superannuation. So we do, the first thing the government ought to be doing, in my view, as a matter of priority, resume those contributions.
OK, so what if that doesn't happen and Labour wins the next election? What are you going to have to do pretty much on day one to the Superfund?
Well, we will be resuming those contributions. We'll accelerate them if we can, but that has got to be priority number one. That will be priority number one for us.
And what amount of money are you talking about then?
Well, it's roughly, $18 to $20 billion behind now. You can't catch that up in a short space of time, but you do have to make the commitment to resume those contributions, start rebuilding that fund so it is ready there and waiting later in the 2020s when it will need to be drawn upon.
But doesn't that essentially mean you might be busting some other elements of your budget if you're going to have to be putting money aside for that?
Well, this is a priority. Superannuation is important. I mean, one of the things we do, we've just heard about child poverty. Actually, one of the things we do well in is avoiding elder poverty, and that's because of our superannuation scheme, and we need to keep that. Other longer-term measures, you might look at what you do with KiwiSaver and so on, but right now we've got to make sure that New Zealand Super is there to look after the people who need it and who are expecting it.
What is it different about New Zealand from a whole variety of other countries that have already committed to incrementally raising the age?
Well, I'm not responsible for what happens in other countries. I do know.
Is it not inevitable, though?
I do know what happens to New Zealanders and working New Zealanders who struggle to get to 65 at the moment, and that's who I am, whose concerns I am reflecting in my view.
Thank you very much for your time today, Andrew Little there, the Labour Party leader. It's now 28 minutes to 8.